Welcome to Intake. This is Bertha's Corner, and I am Bertha Freeman Barrett. Today, joining me is Reina Lombardi. Reina, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. So, give the viewers some background information on yourself.
Sure. I am a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm a board certified art therapist and art therapy credentialed supervisor. And I've been providing mental health services for over 15 years. And I own a small private practice in Fort Myers, Florida called Florida Art Therapy Services. And I have a few other therapists that work with me at the practice, and we serve the community in a variety of ways, providing individual services, but also we go out and do contracted art therapy group services for different agencies in the community, serving a variety of populations. And then in addition to that, I have a consultation business where I help other therapists build their private practice, and that's called Creative Clinicians Corner. So I've been hearing from people from both client-facing and then other therapists, like what they're experiencing right now.
Tell us about some of the things that you're experiencing, that you're actually seeing in your area associated with the COVID virus.
Well, I mean, I think there's just been so much change, just in how everybody's doing every day, and the changes are happening every day, more changes. From the client-facing side, I feel like I've been hearing a lot from parents that are struggling where they're now working from home, but they're also being tasked with, homeschooling the kids because all of the schools have gone online. They're doing education like that. And they just made the call a couple of days ago that is going to last through this school year. So kids definitely won't be going back to school, at least in my community. So that's been hard, I think, for families, hard for the kids too. A lot of kids have been struggling. They want to go back to their normal routine and structure and see their friends and, so a lot of, I think, grief happening in the community over different things. But it's a loss not to be able to go to school for kids. That's something, obviously kids complain about going to school sometimes because it's hard, but they do like being there, and they miss their teachers and they miss their friends and all the activities. For example, if they're in extracurriculars, right, there are a lot of grief and loss about, well, I was in this performance, I was going to be on stage, and it was like my first time, singing solo or things of that nature, and that is now gone, and they're not going to have that opportunity. Or for students that are graduating and not being able to have a graduation. So there's a lot of loss, and that's been hard, I think.
Yeah. That's a lot of stress currently with the virus, a lot of stressors on individuals, specifically young people. I mean, to a certain extent, adults can, somewhat cope and kind of figure out what's going on and manage things. But for the young people, it's hard for them. That adjustment period is hard, of saying, okay, I can no longer see my friends, and to really understand that I can't go out and play with Tommy or Michael or whoever, and I can't go have a sleepover because of this whole virus issue. And so many of their activities are being cut out. So it's pretty difficult for them.
Absolutely. I've had more than a couple of kids who have had birthdays since everything kind of shut down. And that too was kind of a grief for them because they had parties planned and those couldn't happen. And, you know, for adults, again, we can easily probably cope with something like that. But for a little one, that might be the first really big loss for them. The loss of not going to school, the loss of not being able to have that birthday party and celebrate and be with friends, that sense of normalcy. And that, I think, invites a lot of anxiety for kids because, one, we are editing how we're delivering the information to them because we don't want to alarm them. But what ends up happening, or at least what I've seen happening with some of my kids that I work with, is that they're anxious about it. And when we're feeling anxious, we want to solve a problem. We want to make sense of what's going on. And the brain tries to do that. And so they create these narratives about worst case scenario things, right? Like, all of my friends are going to die, or what if my family dies, right? All of they're really carrying that around too. And it's important for us to have conversations with them to, one, validate and normalize the feelings that they're having, and two, help them to create a more adaptive narrative around the experience. Let's talk about all the things that we're doing to keep us and our family safe so that that doesn't happen.
Right.
And how can you give them the information in a way that is digestible for them and easier for them to understand? You know, you can still talk to them and say, yes, you probably have, if parents are watching the news, maybe you've seen that people are dying, but let's talk about that. You know, we're healthy in this family, or if we're not, these are the things that we're doing to protect ourselves and make sure that that doesn't happen to us. If we do get sick, you know, if mom or dad gets sick, this is the plan. We have a plan worked out with so-and-so. And if you haven't made a plan, that would be a good idea for families to do. If there's, you know, immunocompromised family members, which is happening too.
I kept hearing you use the term grief.
Yeah.
And the reason why I brought this up, because I don't think a lot of people are looking at it as a grieving period for a lot of individuals. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of loss. If it's just as small as loss of normalcy, loss of everyday routine. And so there can be a grieving process attached with that. And so I kept hearing you hear the term grief. I just didn't want it to pass over like I didn't hear it, but I think we need to actually talk about that and pinpoint that a lot of people are grieving, and they're grieving at different magnitudes. So we usually look at grief only from the standpoint of death, but grief can happen in various areas. And so we need to pay attention to that. While we do want to be sensitive that a lot of lives have been lost due to this virus. And so as a country, we're grieving, as you know, we have a lot of family members out there grieving from deaths, but there's also some other griefs out there that we need to pay more attention to, especially as mental health professionals.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Bertha. I think in many ways, you know, I know in our profession, we don't necessarily have like a diagnosis for complicated grief, but I think because we're seeing so many layers of loss here, that on the other end, we may see a number of people that are experiencing almost trauma response as a result of all of the layers of grief that they may have experienced during this time. And yeah, there's just so many things. People's lives are still being lived, and that includes actual death.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, they're not even able to participate in their customs and rituals around closure for
Mhm.
the loss of a loved one. And I mean, that itself, that's another type of grief
Right.
on top of the grieving that you're already doing for the loved one.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think we need to really pay close attention to that. And I think it is going to be, after this is over, all said and done, I think mental health professionals are going to have to put a lot of focus on helping people process the trauma, the grief in different areas, because it's needed. And we're looking at anxiety and depression go up, but there are
Mhm.
also other aspects that are affecting individuals' mental health. And
Yeah.
so it's important that we start looking at that and having conversations about it. And how do we go about helping individuals cope and deal with all of this?
Yeah, I think it's really complicated in so many ways. In some respects, people aren't able to access mental health services right now because at the level they may need,
Right.
because facilities might not even be taking in new clients or patients because of what's happening. And I know in like our local crisis hospitals, that might result in extended stay where somebody could actually leave the crisis stabilization unit to be transferred to a facility where they could really engage in the intense mental health services that they need. But the crisis hospital is not set up for that. It's just set up to stabilize. But if that person isn't safe to be released, um, then they are ending up staying there longer, so that the stays there longer. And that can be really taxing on somebody's mental health.
Exactly. Before we get to how you're helping your clients cope, let's talk about this idea of when this first started, how mental health professionals were not included in that. What is the term?
Essential workers.
Essential workers. Yes.
Yeah.
Even I see a lot of organizations that I am included in, mental health organizations, and they're referring to us as the silent first responders
Yeah.
or the invisible first responders. And so let's talk about that, because I think it's important that we start addressing these issues with helping our society understand the need for mental health therapists.
Yeah.
We have to help society break this whole stigma around mental health, because unfortunately it takes events like this, and we've had them too often happen. It takes events like this, shooting events in school, events like this, for our society to finally say, hey, we need some mental health counselors. Yeah, really, which is really
Right.
sad. And while a lot of people are reaching out, organizations are reaching out and saying, hey, we need more mental health professionals. How can we help you guys get to these individuals who are stressing? The reality is this may end, this whole, looking for mental health professionals can go right back to where we've always gone after the crisis is over. Let's forget that we have mental health professionals out there. Let's
Yeah.
continue with our stigmas. So how do we help people break these stigmas?
Stigma for mental health is huge. I
Mm-hmm.
think we're making improvements, but there's so much more that we could be doing. I really think one thing that we need to do just as a society is stop compartmentalizing health care into these different categories. I mean, even the way insurance is provided, it's only in recent years that mental health has been forced to be included on insurance for healthcare.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it was completely a separate policy. Most people didn't have mental health coverage in their health insurance. So even how we structure the system, right? It's not that our mouth is separate from our brain, is separate from our heart, right? We are one being. Everything works together in harmony in order for us to thrive, and that includes our mental health. And so I think we need to shift how we break things apart. But the other, I think we really need to find ways to begin to educate about mental health really early in life.
Right.
I truly believe that it should be included in the school system from the beginning. Upon entry, we should be teaching children social and emotional regulation skills as part of normative curriculum. I think you see some of this happening where monies are being funded to add additional mental health professionals in the schools, but it's very targeted to one issue or a special program for high risk students, let's say. But I think it needs to be comprehensive for all students throughout. If we're teaching them how to do all of the coping strategies that we know are effective from an early age, they start to integrate that. Maybe there would be less of a need for more intensive mental health services later on.
Yes, I agree. Totally agree. So we have to start educating. Definitely need to bring more mental health counselors into schools and
Yeah.
educate at an early age. I mean, because we see it too often. I know I do because I work with adolescents and adults, and I see where even adults have a hard time regulating their emotions or even identifying their emotions. And
Yeah.
so it's very needed that we start this early on in in our young people's lives to help them express themselves, regulate emotions, identify what they're feeling. Because if we
Yeah.
don't, then we just continue to have this, uphill battle with mental health issues. And at some point,
Absolutely.
this has to cease. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we wouldn't have a job if it ceased, but yeah, but we at least, because I'm passionate about this, we at least want to see a decline in
Yeah.
with not being able to regulate your emotions, not being able to express yourself, because unfortunately, that what comes from that is a lot of violence, anger, depression, and so it's the onset of a lot of major issues. But if we could have stopped it early on in life, if we could have addressed it early on in life, it would have been much more beneficial for the individual. And so I think that is very important. And I'm glad that you said that, because we do need to educate more on these issues. Definitely.
Absolutely. And, I think a lot of people think and believe, well, there are social workers and counselors in the school, right? The guidance counselors, but their jobs are really focused on student attendance,
Mm-hmm.
and is the student able to do what they need to do to learn at school.
Right.
And it's not, I mean, they're there if the student does need support, but it's very minimal what they're able to provide, and they're stretched. There might only be two, say, school counselors in a high school. And in some districts, they might rotate and travel from school to school. So they may be responsible for, students at multiple schools. You can't access help if they're not there. Obviously, our larger society needs to be educated on how all of that stuff works, and then we have to do advocacy work politically,
Mm-hmm.
which that's a tough thing to do, but it's important.
Yeah, very important. So, why don't you tell the viewers how you're helping your clients cope and maybe give some suggestions to them for their little ones? Because you are an art therapist, and creativity, we know, is one of the greatest ways of coping because it allows you to express yourself in so many ways. I happen to love being creative myself, and I'm like a little child because I'll pick up a coloring book in a second, a sketch or do something creative just to kind of relax me. So why don't
Yeah.
you give the viewer some tips? What are some things that you're helping your clients with?
Right. So, we've been working on those regulation strategies too, doing a lot of breath work, really focusing in on helping them to remember to breathe from their diaphragm and doing some paced breathing. And those are exercises that are great if you have water paint at home. You could paint with your breath and do watercolors. So, one direction is your inhale, one direction is your outhale, and no focus on what the picture turns out to be. We're not creating an artwork for sale. We're just using that process to self-soothe and regulate and calm. So that's something anybody could do from home on their own. And I've really been talking with families about keeping their structure as much as possible and their routines the same, particularly for my teenagers who, given the break from school, naturally want to push the limit and go to sleep
Right.
later and later. And then they're, waking up later and later. And of course, when those basic like self-care things become dysregulated, that's when we start to have more stress
Mm-hmm.
and start to have more mental health symptoms, right? Where people can't control their thinking, right? They're having really quick thoughts
Mm-hmm.
and they're feeling overwhelmed, or for symptoms of depression. That sleep really impacts folks that struggle with depression. So trying as much as possible to have a consistent routine and structure and making sure that families are putting that in place for everybody. It's important for adults too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we've been talking about that. And then really encouraging families to play together. If we can play together and have fun together, yes, there's all this difficult stuff happening, but there's also opportunities to create moments of joy. And when we can be joyous together and we can play together, that brings us to the here and now moment, and we can be focused on now. And if we're focused on now, I can't think and kind of bargain about what's going on in the past.
Right.
And I'm not worried about the future. I'm just focusing on the now. So any kind of creative activity that is appealing for somebody, because everybody's creative in different ways. I know for me, I love to cook. Last week I spent, I think it was probably 8 hours in the kitchen, and I made homemade raviolis, from the pasta to the filling to everything. I have 3-gallon freezer bags full of different kinds. But that for me is, really relaxing, and I just focused on what I'm doing. I'm not thinking about all the other stuff.
Okay.
So find what creative outlet works for you. For some people, it might be painting. For other people, it might be music. For others, it might be writing. Any way that you can find to express yourself right now is helpful, and document what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Some fun things that I've suggested families do together would be to create a scavenger hunt
Mm-hmm.
of different items that you might encounter on a walk around your neighborhood. And so I'm encouraging people to continue to get out and move their bodies, because we know the stress settles in the body and then we start to carry around that tension. Movement helps us release that. And it also releases the feel good chemicals in the brain that, you know, help mitigate depressive symptoms. So go out on a walk, have a list. It could be different, like plants or trees from your community that you might encounter, different flowers. It could be letters. It could be animals or reptiles. It just depends on where you live, right? In Florida, there's still a lot of ways to get outside. The weather's been great, I should say. I don't know about people up north if it's still like too cold to go do that, but here and anyway, it's been beautiful out. But then take your camera, give your kid a little camera, or they could use their phone, and then and see how many of those things you can take a picture of that are on your scavenger hunt list. So in this way, it's not necessarily an expressive oriented creative activity, but it's an activity to be playful, to have fun, to notice your environment, right? If we're focused on noticing what's in front of us right now, again, we go back to that sense of mindfulness where we're not worrying about the future and we're not thinking about the past. I'm just noticing, and it creates an opportunity to appreciate what is out there in your natural environment too.
Okay, beautiful. All right, so why don't you tell the viewers how they can find you? How do they locate you, find out more information about your organization, things that you are doing?
Yeah, sure. So they could go to my practice website, which is floridaarttherapyservices.com, and there's tons of information on what we do there. In addition to serving clients, I also do continuing education trainings and things of that nature. So you'd be able to find all that information there. And then my consulting business is the Creative Clinicians Corner, and it's really focused on helping therapists build a private practice grounded in creative techniques. And I also have a podcast there. It's called The Creative Psychotherapist.
Nice.
And so people can find out about the podcast there, or they can listen to that wherever they listen to podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, things like that. And that website is creativeclinicianscorner.com.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. I want to have you come back soon, hopefully.
I'd love
to. And just have some more discussion with you. So thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing that information with viewers. Tell them the area you are in again. Tell them where you're located again. My brain is doing all kind of stuff today because I'm tired.
But it's okay. Yeah. I am too. I don't even know if I said it. Yeah. I'm in Fort Myers, Florida. I can't remember if I even said that. Okay. Yeah, so I'm in Southwest Florida.
Wonderful. All right, so that's it for the day for Bertha's Corner. Remember, until the next time, continue to talk about mental health and how to make yours a priority. Have a great one. If you're a professional who would like to be on the show, or an individual who has struggled with mental health and would like to be a guest, email us at info@intake.tv.
Follow us on all of our social media platforms. Okay.